Next on AM 1480 WLEA, the Newsmaker Show. Here's Brian O'Neill.
Tuesday, May 21st. Glad to have with us, as always, on the Tuesday, Alfred University history professor, Dr. Gary Ostrower. Good morning, Gary.
Well, hello there, Brian. Looks like a great day out there.
Yeah, it sure is. Nice and sunny. We had it on our news this morning, and Dr. Heineman was telling me about this recently, that they got the work done on a bridge over in Alfred Station, so that seems like good news.
Well, it's nice that it took them about a year and a half to do it, but yeah, it is good news. The state's a little slow when it comes to some of the rural areas here.
Dr. Ostrower, where would you like to start out this morning?
I want to make a comment about baseball, if you don't mind.
Go right ahead.
I went to a game the other day. This is about, maybe 2.5 weeks ago or so. It was up in Toronto. I went to the Rogers Center there. And the reason I went up is that there was a minor league ball player by the name of Vladimir Guerrero Jr. Now, he's the son of a Hall of Famer, Vladimir Guerrero, who played with, among other teams, I think the Texas Rangers and the Montreal Expos and whatnot. Anyhow, his son had a really, really good career in the minor league and was finally brought up by the Toronto Blue Jays. So myself and some tens of thousands of other people arrived up there to watch his first game, and he did reasonably well. He got a near home run, but it was a beautiful catch by an outfielder, which robbed him of that. And then his second baseman robbed him of a screaming line drive that should have been probably a double or so. But in the ninth inning, the Blue Jays are behind by, I think it was 1 run. And in the last of the ninth, Guerrero is the first guy up, and he hits a double. Of course, the fans are going wild. In fact, they were going wild when he went out for batting practice. They were going wild when he simply stretched. He seemed to be, probably the most important minor league prospect since Steve Strasburg around 10 years ago, who eventually went to the Washington Nationals. In any case, about 2 batters later, a batter hitting all of 176 hits a home run. It's a walk-off home run. The Blue Jays win the game in the last of the ninth inning with 2 outs. I mean, it couldn't have really been more dramatic. The fans are going crazy, and I mean, they're going nuts. And I must admit that I was among them. But it got me thinking about what's going on? Why are we so crazy when it comes to, our sports team, whether it's the Buffalo Bills up in this area or the Toronto Blue Jays up in Canada or whatever? And it occurred to me that what's really going on is that the support that we offer to these teams is a form of local nationalism. And I was reminded that I guess it was about a week ago, maybe a little bit more than a week ago, a very, very fine historian by the name of John Lucas, who taught in a small college in Pennsylvania for years and years. He had migrated to the United States from Hungary many years ago. He wrote a superb book about Winston Churchill. He wrote a terrific book about the relationship between Churchill and Adolf Hitler. The book was called The Duel. And it was John Lucas who said that, look, the most important ideology in the entire 20th century, as we look back on, the last 100 or so years of history, was not liberalism, it was not fascism, it was not communism. The most important was nationalism. And I think that Lucas is right. And it seems to me that in some ways what that nationalism represents on a somewhat more local scale is the emotionalism that we pour into these baseball teams. It really doesn't make very much, not just baseball. It could be basketball, it could be football, it could be whatever. These athletic teams, way back during the Roman period, they used to say if you give the people bread, in other words food, and you give them circuses, in other words entertainment, you'll have them, they'll do anything you want them to do. They're in your hands if you're a political leader. And I think there's something to that today, and I think that, the way in which we connect with all of these sports teams is simply one more representation of that. Brian, the other thing I wanted to say, and you might want to talk about something else, but I wanted to say something about the whole issue of impeachment, which is becoming, more and more of a discussion point, both for Democrats as well as for Republicans. I think that some of our listeners may know that a Michigan congressman, a Republican of all things, by the name of Amash, had said that, there really are grounds to impeach President Trump right now. So do you want to get into this subject, or do you want to kind of lead me into another direction?
Go ahead, Dr. Ostrower.
Well, it seems to me that if President Trump is looking for anything, he wants to goad the Democrats into articles of impeachment. In other words, he wants to goad the House of Representatives into impeaching him. Now, there are plenty of Democrats in the House of Representatives who would love to do nothing more than that. So why would Trump be encouraging them to do this? And it seems to me that it probably has to do with maybe 3 or 4 things. For one thing, if you go back to the year 1999 and 2000, when the Republicans impeached Bill Clinton, and then, of course, there was a trial in the Senate, and the Senate did not vote to impeach, but to convict him. But the process of impeachment is part of the House of Representatives' responsibility. Clinton came out of that whole process more popular than he went in. It looked as if, in other words, the Republicans back in the year 2000 were doing this for political reasons. The justification for, the impeachment process was really not very, very solid. Yes, indeed, Clinton had committed perjury, and that is, I suppose, an impeachable crime. But it didn't seem to be going very far. And I think that, the degree to which the Republicans weakened themselves in that whole process, as they say, Clinton came out more popular than he had been when he went into the whole process, is something that Trump remembers. In addition to that, Trump likes nothing more than controversy. He thrives on controversy. He stirs up controversy. He uses controversy for his own purposes. An example would be, for instance, about 2 years ago when there was some very tense situation with North Korea. Trump came out and he made some really insulting comments about Mika Brzezinski, who was, a newscaster, but who was very, very anti-Trump. He said that she had had a facelift, that she showed up at one of his parties, dripping with blood. I mean, stuff that is obviously not true, and so much of what he says is not true. But the newspapers, the media, the TV programs, and so forth, concentrated on his comments about Mika Brzezinski, which were absurd, and not on what was happening with North Korea, which was anything but absurd. In other words, he uses this kind of controversy for his own purposes. And I think that he's going to do the same thing with impeachment right now. He's going to claim, if the Democrats try to impeach him, that it's a coup d'etat. In other words, that it's a way to reverse the results of the election of 2016. He's going to claim that it's done for purely partisan purposes. It's nothing to do with constitutional provisions, with the law itself and whatnot. And to that extent, I think that he's going to divert the Democratic Party into a very, very unproductive direction. The person who understands this better than anyone else is Nancy Pelosi, which is why she does not want the Democrats to become focused on the subject of impeachment. She wants them to be focused on the subject of health care, which is an issue over which the Democrats might just win the election in 2020. But, for the president, I think he knows exactly what he's doing, and I think that the Democrats will be making a terrific mistake, at least a political mistake, if they indeed go the route for impeachment, even if there are valid constitutional grounds for holding the president accountable.
Who do you think is more influential right now, AOC or Nancy Pelosi, as far as the direction that the party wants to go in?
I think that there has been a great exaggeration of the influence of AOC. She's new. She's kind of telegenic. She certainly won an election that she hadn't been expected to win 2 years ago. That eventually got her into the House of Representatives. But I think that she is, her influence is greatly, greatly exaggerated. On the other hand, she speaks for, and I think that there are a lot of others in Congress who share some of her attitudes toward economics, and especially toward Donald Trump. But I think that Pelosi is much more significant at this point. Pelosi is a pro. She's been around for a long, long time. She has very, very good political instincts. As Donald Trump has good political instincts, I think Pelosi has very good political instincts. Now, will Pelosi be able to control the Democratic Party in respect to this whole subject of impeachment? Hey, your guess is as good as mine. But so far, she has done it, I think, reasonably successfully. Certainly, there has been no vote to impeach the president in the House. And my hunch is that so long as Pelosi is there, there's not going to be. I think that Pelosi is going to ultimately, win this. Now, after 2020, after the election of 2020, that could change, especially if the Democrats should take control of the Senate. But right now, Pelosi understands that the Senate, so long as it's controlled by the Republicans, will never, never, never convict the president. And therefore, to go the impeachment route is simply going to, maybe make some Democrats feel better, but it's certainly going to have no serious effect on removing him from office.
Yeah, I think you're right. It's Dr. Gary Ostrower. We're going to take a quick break, and we'll be back with Dr. Ostrower in just a moment.
It's time for the Hornell Rotary Community Blood Screening Program coming up on Saturday, June 1st at St. James Hospital's cafeteria. Please use the Canastillo Street entrance by the gazebo. Screenings are open to uninsured, underinsured people over the age of 18. This is an inexpensive way for community members with high deductible health plans to monitor their health. Appointments are accepted beginning May 23rd by calling 607-590-7423. The cost is only $35. That's the Hornell Rotary Community Blood Screening Program, Saturday, June 1st, sponsored by UR Medicine, St. James Hospital, and the Hornell Rotary.
Checking in now with meteorologist Rob Carolyn. Hey, Rob, sunny out there this morning.
Yes, off to a nice start, Brian. A little chilly out there. We've got temperatures generally on either side of 40 degrees this morning, but the good news is sun is very strong this time of year. Days are relatively long, so we're going to see a nice recovery. May need a jacket much of the day, but I take the lighter jacket with me today. Temperature should come up quite nicely as high pressure builds in across the northeast today and tomorrow. Today we'll call it partly sunny. It's going to be a little breezy, 60 to 65 this afternoon. Sunrise earlier this morning was at 5:43. Tonight the sun sets at 8:31, giving us 14 hours and 48 minutes of day length. Tonight we're clear, we're cool yet again. Should be about 40 to 45 overnight. Tomorrow high pressure stays in control. We're partly sunny. Some high clouds will move through. A little milder tomorrow, 70 to 75. Warm front could bring us some showers tomorrow night. Lows will be near 55. Scattered showers, a little more humid by Thursday. Thursday afternoon, we're 75 to 80. Looks like we'll break into some sunshine by Friday, Brian.
Thank you, Rob. Back to Gary. Dr. Gary Ostrower, Alfred University history professor. Dr. Ostrower, are you ready to move on to this day in history yet?
Not quite yet. I want to make a comment, if I may, one more comment in respect to the subject of impeachment. And that is, has the president in fact committed crimes, what the Constitutional describes as high crimes and misdemeanors, but doesn't really say what a high crime is. And even the term misdemeanor had a somewhat different meaning back in the 18th century than it does today. But has he committed something along these lines? And I think the answer is, yeah, of course he has. And if you want proof of that, simply don't take my word for it. Don't take Nancy Pelosi's word for it or AOC's word for it or anyone else's word for it. Read the Mueller report. Just read the Mueller report. Just read what the Mueller report says in respect to obstruction of justice. When the president seeks to have some of his own officials lie to the Mueller investigation, when the president seeks to undermine the independence not only of the Department of Justice but of the checks and balances principle and so forth, I think the answer is quite clearly he has. Now, whether or not politically it makes sense to impeach him, that's something else, and that's of course where the whole issue of Nancy Pelosi comes in. But I don't think there's any question whatsoever that the president has committed actions that warrant impeachment, and I think that's what the Republican Congressman Jason Amash was saying just this past weekend. That when you read the report, it becomes crystal clear that the president has done things that may, in fact, legally warrant impeachment. Now, I want to, if I may, just go on to one other little topic before we get to this day in history, and that's the Democratic race. There are two things I noticed over the course of this past weekend that I thought were worth bringing to our attention. Number one, the fact that Mayor Pete, okay, I think we all know who Mayor Pete is these days, Buttigieg, from South Bend, Indiana, appeared on a kind of open house thing on Fox TV. And I asked myself, wait a minute, there are a lot of Democrats who are not going to appear on Fox, which is so pro-Trump. Why did he do it? And when he was asked about that, he said two things which I thought are kind of sort of interesting. Number one, he said, 20% of Fox viewership are Democrats. And if that's the case, and I have no reason to doubt it, if that's the case, then, there are people who listen to Fox who may very well vote for someone other than President Trump when it comes to the re-election in 2020. And the other little tidbit that I heard over the course of the weekend, which I thought was kind of interesting, is that Kristin Gillibrand, Senator Gillibrand here from New York State, who declared about, 4, 5, 6 months ago or so her candidacy for president, is doing very, very poorly in the in the area of raising money. And if you can't raise money, you're not going to wind up running an effective campaign. There's a Democratic candidate by the name of Marie Williamson. Now, Brian, my hunch is that probably only about 1% of the people who are listening to this program right now could identify who Marie Williamson is. There's another Democratic candidate by the name of Andrew Yang, Y-A-N-G. Again, same thing. Probably very, very few people listening to this program could identify him. Both of these people are running for president on the Democratic ticket. And what I find so interesting is that both of them have raised more money than Kristin Gillibrand right now. And if I'm correct about that, and I believe I am, if I'm correct about that, I think it says that Kristin Gillibrand is not going to remain in this race for very long at all.
Yes, she has been having a very difficult time. It shows in the polls and in other ways. Andrew Yang, that's a familiar name to me. The other one, Marie Williamson, I had not heard of yet. I will say there was a Andrew Yang sign when I drove through North Hornell the other day, though.
Really? I'm shocked at that. I have not seen any Andrew Yang signs here in Olean, where I am right now, or in Alfred, where I live and where I teach at Alfred University. Look, maybe he has, quote, legs. I mean, maybe we're going to hear more from these people. But, when you have, I think 24 declared candidates right now among the Democrats, I don't think we should be terribly surprised that some of them are going to be flying under the radar. Who knows if we wind up with a war in Iran, as a result of, current tensions and so forth, maybe some of this is going to change. Who knows how that affects the political race. But at this point, as I say, I think that Senator Gillibrand is in real trouble.
You're right there, talking to Dr. Gary Ostrower, Alfred University history professor. Getting to this day in history now, on May 20th, 1969, Senator Ted Kennedy was being very critical in the media of the Vietnam War's battle for Hamburger Hill, and on this day in history, May 21st, 1969, the military spokesman, a military command spokesman in Saigon, defended the Battle of Hamburger Hill. May 21st. A South Vietnamese general commanding the 101st Airborne Division that took Hamburger Hill responded to continuing media criticism, saying that his orders had been to destroy enemy forces there. Your thoughts and recollections on the whole Hamburger Hill incident, Dr. Ostrower?
Well, I mean, we don't remember Hamburger Hill very much today, and that's because it had a very minor effect on the total outcome in South Vietnam. The United States Army would win many, many conventional battles, as they did, I think, at Hamburger Hill, as they did at Compiègne, as they did at Quai San. I don't know whether most people would remember those names, but if you're as old as I am, you certainly do. And yet, we lost the war. We won the conventional battles, but we lost the war, and we lost the war because American policymakers never fully took into account. And by the way, when I say American policymakers, I mean during the Democratic Lyndon Johnson years, I mean during the Republican Richard Nixon years, never fully came to terms with the degree to which it was a political war, not just a military conflict. But I might add, by the way, that since we're talking about this day in history, Charles Lindbergh.
I saw that, I wanted to bring up Vietnam because it's more recent. But go ahead on the Lindbergh thing.
Well, I mean, in 1927, Charles Lindbergh became the first person to fly solo across the Atlantic Ocean. And when I say solo, I think that, it's important to remember that. There were people, even I think as early as 1919, who flew across the Atlantic, but in a plane that carried more than one individual. Lindbergh did this in a solo fashion, and he became an international hero. He left from an airport in Long Island and wound up at Le Bourget Airport in Paris. And it became, as I say, he became one of the great American heroes of the 20th century. And I think you got to ask yourself, well, why? I mean, why was there so much emphasis on the importance of Charles Lindbergh and what he did in 1927? And I think the answer has to do with two things. Number one, the American frontier was disappearing. Back in the 19th century, America was defined. This country was defined by the movement west. It was defined by that frontier. And in the 1890s, the Department of the Census, the Bureau of the Census, which is part of the Commerce Department a few years later, made the statement that as we have previously understood it, the frontier no longer exists. That American population expansion had continued from the East Coast, of course, eventually to the Pacific, and that area that could be defined as the frontier. And that's an area that would mean where there were fewer than 2 people per square mile. That's how the Census Bureau defined it. That frontier no longer existed. And I think there was a great deal of nostalgia for that frontier. And yet, Lindbergh, in a sense, was, how shall I say it? He was crossing the Atlantic. That was the new frontier. And not only was he doing it, but he was doing it alone, like Daniel Boone, like Davy Crockett, these guys who seemed to be larger than life. And I think that Lindbergh represented that. But he did it in another way. I mean, when Davy Crockett went into the frontier, when Daniel Boone went into the frontier, they did it on foot. Lindbergh didn't do it on foot, of course. He did it with a machine. And in a sense, I think that what Lindbergh was really doing was kind of fusing together the frontier spirit of the 19th century with the technological, the industrial, spirit of what's going to become the 20th century. He does it together. He would often, by the way, Lindbergh, not talk about what I did. He would talk about what we did. And what he meant by we was that he and his airplane, it was called the Spirit of St. Louis, and he always referred to them, to those things together. I and we, in other words, he talked about, he utilized the plural.
You know who else does that, Dr. Ostrower?
Go ahead.
Congressman Tom Reed. And it really, the reporters give him a hard time for it. When Reed is talking about himself, and I think what he's saying is my staff and I. But he's always using we, and for years the reporters have said, would you please not say we?
Yeah, well, I think that words matter. They carry political meaning. It's interesting, President Trump speaks about I, and I. Many other politicians equally how shall I say, successful, are going to use the plural. But in any case, I think that one shouldn't ignore the kind of the historical importance of what Lindbergh did. It was a great moment in American history.
Dr. Ostrower, with that we have to go, but thank you so much as always for joining us.
My pleasure, Brian.